Is fluoride bad for us? That's what's being litigated in California right now in a major lawsuit that is not getting a lot of attention, surprisingly. Derek Brose has been following this acutely. He's asked to come on Redacted and tell us about it, and we said, yes, absolutely. We want to know everything about that. Closing arguments are happening in the case today in San Francisco, so it's a good day to talk about it. Derek, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for giving a little bit of a signal boost to this story.
Right. Okay. So take us through it. Why is this such a landmark case and why do we not know about it? Can you give us a little bit of the history and the history of it not only happening, but being silenced?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a law that was passed in the United States called the Toxic Substance Control Act, which allows regular people, American citizens, to petition the EPA if they believe that a chemical or a compound has been proven to be toxic. And in this case, the Fluoride Action Network, Moms Against Fluoridation, and a few different plaintiffs, mothers whose children have been affected by water fluoridation, they filed a petition under TSCA to the EPA in 2016, essentially arguing that the data proves that fluoride is a neurotoxin and that it affects the IQ of children, especially during pregnancy and then postnatal. And the EPA rejected the petition, and this led to a lawsuit. So this has been going on since 2016, 2017, and it's essentially just kind of been the courtroom proceedings. But the first phase of the trial actually began in summer 2020. Of course, it was COVID lockdown, so it took place via Zoom. And I was reporting on it for the last American Vagabond, doing live tweeting while watching Zoom and just writing articles. And in that first phase of the trial, there were some pretty big revelations that I can share about today. But essentially, what happened in 2020, Judge Edward Chin, the federal judge who's overseeing this case, he decided that since the US government's National Toxicology Program, the NTP, was at that time currently studying fluoride, they were doing what's called a monograph. They were doing this massive review of all the data on fluoride, and they were focusing on just the low risk of bias, high quality studies, and trying to decide is this really a toxin or is it not? And so the judge at that time said, you know what, this NTP report's going on right now. Let's just put everything on hold for a moment. Let's wait for this report to come out. And well, fast forward, here we are 4 years later, and the report still hasn't been officially released. But in that time, because of the lawsuit, one of the beautiful things of this lawsuit, and one of the other things that makes it historic, is the Fluoride Action Network and their lead attorney, Michael Conant, who's a brilliant attorney. They were able to do discovery and to file open records requests and to get all kinds of data from the government. And in that process, they obtained emails from the CDC's Oral Health Division, as well as emails that mention U.S. Assistant Secretary of Health Rachel/Richard Levine intervened to prevent the NTP study from coming out. These emails, which we've released in the last year or so, show that the NTP scientists, U.S. government scientists, wanted to release their report in May 2022, but these elements of the U.S. government prevented it from coming out. And the only reason we know that is because of these emails that came out in the lawsuit.
Wait,
And
wait, 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 wait. That's
sure.
shocking. Rachel
Mhm.
Levine, we know, is no stranger to giving substances with wild abandon to every
Yeah.
human body. And so, what was the justification for holding back this report?
So the U.S. government has publicly said they don't think it's ready for release. That it's not complete. The evidence is not clear. It's inconclusive. These sort of things. But the interesting thing, because of these emails, again, we actually have the emails of the scientists themselves. So while the scientists at the National Toxicology Program were saying our study's ready for release May 2022, they had already set the date for publication. They were going to publish it on their servers. And then while they're having that conversation over at the CDC and HHS, they're saying this report's not going to happen. And
Well,
one email
okay,
specifically mentions Rachel
that's
Levine
not
will not let this report come out.
That's not how a research report works. You don't run it through the politicians to see if they like it. If the scientists think it's done, then we should be able to see it. That in and of itself is shocking. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's important to kind of break that down. And I think that the most important point here to highlight is, okay, so what was the scientist's conclusion, right? What did they conclude? What did the
Do we
NTP
know?
conclude? We do know because, again, because of this study, and now that we've resumed the second phase, Judge Chin did allow the NTP report in its draft form, since it's never been officially released. He did allow it into evidence, and that report says fluoride exposure is associated with lower IQ in children. It couldn't be more clear as day as that, and that is what this whole case is revolving around. Can the Fluoride Action Network prove to Judge Edward Chin, as they've been trying for the last 2 weeks in San Francisco, to show him that the data proves that we have more than enough evidence, as the NTP, the government's own scientists, have said, fluoride has an association with lower IQ in children, specifically when pregnant mothers are consuming it, and then of course postnatal. It has a very detrimental impact on our neurocognitive development. And so, I actually, as you mentioned, have been in San Francisco the last 2 weeks, and I had the opportunity to interview three of the expert witnesses, three of the scientists that were presenting for the Fluoride Action Network. And if I could just briefly, I'd like to quote directly from them, because I'm not a scientist, I'm just a journalist myself. But I asked Dr. Howard Hu, for example, and he said, quote, "Yes, I would say that in my view, the evidence is quite persuasive that there is a negative impact of fluoride exposure on the neurodevelopment of children, particularly the research that's been coming out in prenatal exposure." And then I asked Dr. Bruce Lamphere the same question, and he said, quote, "Well, what we found, whether we looked at urinary fluoride levels from the mom as a measure or water fluoride, was that in every case we saw IQ deficits in the children." So this is why you're not hearing about this story, because this poison is in the water, and your taxpayer dollars are paying for it. And there's elements of the U.S. government trying to prevent this study from coming out. Of course, we have other studies and other data, but they know that this study coming from the U.S. government's own branch of scientists would be pretty powerful and pretty impactful. So instead, they've done everything they can to prevent it from being released to the public.
Now, the plaintiffs in this case that are suing the EPA, what do they want? Do they want it removed, or do they want damages, or all of those things?
They're just, at this point, this is just specifically a suit to see. So if you do win in the petition process under TSCA, the EPA has several different actions that they can take. And one of those, yes, would be banning it or regulating it. As it is now, I think that the case here is trying to prove that we can we can prove that fluoride is causing harm. We might not know the exact level, but if we're going to err on the side of the precautionary principle, or what the EPA calls the uncertainty factor, which is when you consider the most vulnerable populations, then it should be banned. Even if this is what the process they've done with lead, what they've done with mercury. And in fact, I think it's probably appropriate to say that fluoride is the new lead. Fluoride is the new mercury, because two of the expert witnesses that spoke at this trial for the plaintiffs, Dr. Bruce Lamphere and Dr. Philippe Grandjean, are the leading experts who helped develop the EPA's own regulatory protocols for lead and for mercury. And in this case, they're speaking up and saying this is even more harmful. This is causing damage internally. I could speak more about, when a mother, like they showed data showing that as the mother progresses through her pregnancy, by the third trimester, as she's drinking more water and consuming more to feed her baby, if she's drinking fluoridated water, she's increasing the amount of fluoride in her body. It stores in her bones. And then as her baby starts to form its skeletal structure, it's going to pull all that fluoride right out of mom's bones into its body, pass through the blood-brain barrier, into the placenta. And it's showing that there is an impact on cognitive development.
I believe whole house filtration systems, though, do they filter out fluoride? A lot of them do, right?
So the only thing that we know that does filter out fluoride, and it's not even, I would say, 100%, depending on the quality of the filter, is reverse osmosis.
Right.
So reverse osmosis will remove everything. Of course, it removes like everything. So if you're doing that, it's advisable to kind of remineralize your water with some trace minerals or something. But yeah, you could, if you have the money and you have the ability, you can buy shower filters, you can buy house filters, you can go buy the 5-gallon jugs and fill up at the local water filtration system. But as is typical with these kind of situations, the people who are, let's say, lower socioeconomic status, don't have extra cash to spend, they're going to be the ones who are most impacted by this, because you are showering it, you're cooking in it, you're drinking it. If you're eating processed foods, it more than likely has fluoridated water. When you go out to eat at a restaurant, more than likely has fluoridated water being given to you. And fluoride is also in pesticides. So it's not just, this case is focused on water fluoridation, but there is actually so many different exposures that, at least in the United States, that we're all facing.
Can you remind us all why the United States has fluoride in the water to begin with?
Sure. So in the 1940s, there's actually a really great book I'll recommend for those who want to do a deep dive, more than we have time today. It's called The Fluoride Deception by journalist Christopher Bryson. But he goes through the history, and actually, there's some connections to the Manhattan Project and the U.S. nuclear program. Not only were they studying uranium, but they were also studying fluoride, and they understood the impact way back then. There were some incidents where fluoride, because what we're calling fluoride, there is naturally occurring fluoride, calcium fluoride, sodium fluoride, and it's important to know that all of the types of fluoride have been associated with harm. So just because it's quote unquote naturally occurring doesn't mean it doesn't cause harm. But most of what we're talking about, what's added to the US water supply, is hydrofluorosilicic acid, which is a byproduct of aluminum phosphate mining. And in the past, these companies, they would have had to pay to dispose of this toxin. Instead, now they're getting paid by cities around the United States to add it to the water. And so in the 40s and the 50s, there was quite a bit of propaganda. The American Dental Association, working with Edward Bernays, working with Alcoa, which is the aluminum, representing the aluminum industry, they came together and started getting studies produced that claimed that because fluoride hardens the bones, which it does, that it's good for the teeth. And thus, if we're going to help all these poor kids in the rural areas who don't have proper dental care, we need to start fluoridating the water. And much like vaccines, the CDC, if you go on their website, they currently promote water fluoridation as one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. So there are some major influences in people that would like for this story to stay suppressed and would like for water fluoridation to continue happening, not only because then the companies who produce this toxic waste would have to figure out how they're going to dispose of it without getting paid to, put it in the water, but also the potential here, you asked about money earlier. If the judge does find in the case of the plaintiffs, you would imagine that the American Dental Association, the CDC, the FDA, and all the various branches of government who've been promoting this for generations now, going on 80 years, would potentially be opened up to class action lawsuits by parents and family members who might say, did my child lose IQ points? Is my thyroid messed up because of fluoride? Are my hips, hurting do I have arthritis because of fluoride? These are all symptoms of overfluoridation and fluoride exposure.
Crap. Okay. this is this is really upsetting me. So, okay, what is at stake here for the closing arguments today? What specifically is the judge going to rule about in the next few days? And then what happens next?
Sure. So what we're dealing with right now is the closing arguments are taking place from the EPA, from the government, and the closing arguments from the Floyd Action Network. The judge also has
I'm
a
sorry,
number
but
of
can I interrupt
questions.
you with a question? Is the EPA
Sure.
really trying to argue that it's fine?
Well, this is one another reason why it's historic. They have acknowledged that it is causing harm. I will say that this is the first time probably ever that the EPA in a court, their attorneys have said, "Okay, judge, we know it's causing harm," but what they're essentially trying to do is say, the CDC recommends water fluoridation at zero point 0.7 milligrams per liter, and there's no evidence that, or the evidence is fuzzy, it's cloudy once we get closer to that. Yeah, we know it causes harm, but that's only at these higher levels. And so they're admitting, yes, there's harm, but it's way beyond the legally allowable limits. So, judge, it's too uncertain. You shouldn't rule this way. Where Fluoride Action Network and Michael Connett, they've proven, and the data shows that even at the levels of the current North American drinking water levels, there is harm. I mean, there was a brand new study that just came out from the Canadian Health Agency, actually, because Canada and the UK are actually right now considering starting to fluoridate their countries. So that's why this is also important. But as far as what's taking place today, both going to make closing arguments. And then the judge, he will have some questions because this is a historic case in the sense that this is the first time a federal judge is being asked to rule on science. And I imagine most scientists don't want a judge kind of second guessing their work. And obviously, the judge isn't a scientist, but he's been doing his best to keep up. They're talking benchmark and point of departure and margin of exposure and all these jargony terms, and the judge is stopping them every now and saying, hold on, okay, I'm getting confused, can you explain that to me? He seems to be genuinely trying to understand the whole case. He hasn't just been on the government side, and he hasn't really been on the Fluoride Action Network side. He seems like he really wants to get to the bottom of this. So after today concludes, he'll take some time to review all the evidence, all the witness testimony, and hopefully within a couple of weeks we will have an answer and a ruling here, and hopefully it goes the side of the Fluoride Action Network. So one of the other really important components I think to mention is what Dr. Philippe Grandjean told me. Again, he's a Danish scientist. He's one of the leading experts in mercury and has done some amazing work. And in the 2020 phase of the lawsuit, he said something along the lines of he had been he had been pushed out of Harvard, and he also mentioned that the World Health Organization had been taken over by the fluoride lobby. And I got really curious about that, and so I actually got to interview him last week and had him sit down and explain a little further, what did you mean by that? And again, I'd like to just quote directly from him if I could. He relayed this story to me, how he started to study water fluoridation and its relation to neurotoxicity at Harvard. And he had another professor come up to him, and he said this, quote, "A professor from Harvard came to my office and asked me to sign a statement that my work on fluoride had nothing to do with fluoridation. He actually wrote this draft, and since I didn't sign immediately, he instead went to my dean and had the dean sign a statement that that he supported water fluoridation in accordance with the policy of the CDC. And he basically said they took his name off this report. They put out a report saying fluoride was great, and he told me, quote, "Because I couldn't agree on what I consider my academic freedom, I left Harvard." And then when I asked him about what happened at the World Health Organization, he said that he was hired to help the World Health Organization develop environmental health criteria. And as he began gathering his data and putting his report together, he said, quote, "They inserted changes in my draft indicating that fluoride could perhaps be toxic, but only at immense concentrations. I protested and said that in accordance with the scientific documentation, it would be wrong to insert the word immense." And so the WHO published a document without my name because I took my name off, and they inserted some other colleague's name as the author of the draft, which is of course erroneous. But that was what the WHO felt was necessary in order to protect the interests of water fluoridation.
Okay, so again, we have proof that when you mix science with politics, you get politics. And that seems to be what's happening. So, will you come back and give us updates on this case then as you continue to follow it?
Absolutely. I would love to come back and share. And I hope everybody hearing this can visit my website, theconsciousresistance.com. You can see all those interviews I just mentioned. You can find my reporting, all the articles I've written for the last 4 years at thelastamericanvagabond.com. We have a fluoride trial section. And I will be following and keeping up on these updates, and happy to share them with your audience.
Okay, thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you for the first time, and I'm sure it won't be the last time.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. You know, YouTube thinks that you'll actually like this next video right here. It's personalized based on your own viewing habits. So if you watch the video, please leave a comment. Let us know what you think about it, and we will see you next time, everyone.